Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webcast. My name is Christine Dursey-Davis. I'm the Executive Director of the Ohio chapter of the American Planning Association, and I am your webcast moderator. Today is Friday, October 30th, and we will hear the presentation, Capturing the Best Elements of Engagement in a Digital First World. For technical help during today's webcast, you can type your questions in the chat box found in the webcast toolbar. And for your content questions related to the presentation, the same thing, just type them in the chat box, and we will answer those at the end of the presentation during the Q&A. Coming up next on your screen is a list of our sponsoring chapters and divisions for 2020. Thanks to all of those sponsors for joining us and making these webcasts possible and free to members. Today in particular, we are sponsored by the Colorado chapter of APA. So thanks to you, APA Colorado, for sponsoring today's session. Coming up next on your screen is a screenshot actually of our webcast webpage, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. If you head over there, that's where you can register for all of our upcoming sessions. We have a lot of sessions coming up, and not just on Fridays. We have them Tuesdays through Thursday. Sorry, my helper here is trying to advance my slides. He wants me to be done. So just head over to the webcast webpage to register for all of our sessions. We also have some sessions available for on-demand distance education. We have some ethics, we have some law, and we have some general sessions. So be sure to check out our webcast webpage again so that you can get those credits if you need them. Today's session has been approved for 1.5 CM credits. You can log your credits by heading over to planning.org and logging into your My APA account. And from there, you can either search by today's title or event number, both of which can be found on our webcast webpage. Finally, like us on Facebook, just search Planning Webcast Series and we'll pop up. That's where I post any immediate information, like a new session that you can register for, or if there's a change in a date or time, that's where I post anything like that. And lastly, make sure that you head over to YouTube and subscribe to our channel. Again, just search Planning Webcast Series on YouTube and we'll pop up along with our over 300 videos and over 3,000 subscribers. So be sure to join us so that you can see recordings and get notifications on all of our sessions. So with that, I am going to finish up my housekeeping here and turn the controls over to Mitch, who will get us started here. Okay, Mitch, those controls are headed over to you.
Okay.
Success, way to go, Mitch. I just want to say
thank you. Good start.
Awesome. I just want to say thank you to Christine and APA. You know, we started this conversation about 4 or 5 months ago about this webinar. So this obviously takes a lot of time, a lot of coordination, a lot of communication, and it's not like there's anything else going on, right? So thank you very much. My name is Amanda Nagel. Among a myriad of other things, I, during COVID, have started my own training and consulting company, Unlocking Government, and am eager to continue to help local governments, consulting agencies really do exactly what we're talking about today, right? How do we take digital tools? How do we take face-to-face, when and how we're allowed to do it moving forward? And how do we produce these awesome processes whereby our community feels connected in the decisions that are made that impact them? I've had the opportunity to work for 3 of Colorado's Front Range cities over the last 20 years. And also for Bang the Table, specializing in online engagement for the last few. Throughout that, I was able to meet so many local governments, quasi-governmental agencies, and consultancies who are all trying to do exactly what we're talking about today. I have to say that Logan Simpson, in my experience, stands as high or above anyone I've had the privilege to work with. I just love what they do as far as innovation and integration. So with innovation, it's a company that's willing to take on new things. You're going to see that today. We're willing to give it a try, willing to give it a go. We're going to model that for you today and learn from it and keep moving forward in process and in communication. They're also fantastic at integration. So observing their projects over the years, you really get to watch how they pull the very best from everything they do to build one fantastic product. So we're going to move through some overview materials kind of quickly at times. Mitch has been charged with prodding and pushing as needed, so you might see that, because where we really want to end up today to meet is looking specifically at some of their hands-on projects. So we hope you'll enjoy the ride. We'll hope you'll participate in the tools and enjoy this as much as I think the three of us are going to enjoy it. So without further ado, Bruce Meehan would like to let you introduce yourself and talk more about Logan Simpson.
Sure. Well, one, I want to thank both you, Amanda, and APA for hosting this. We did one of these sessions at the beginning of COVID, and it was really about us reacting. It was us learning how to use Zoom and other things. Now we're, settled in, right? And it's really what is the next stage, and it's sort of accepting and evolving and actually making it better in public involvement. And it's interesting to look back at our first session and then having a session today. And I think for all our great people who have joined us on a Friday afternoon, you should also do that and look at how the world's changed over the last 6 months. Logan Simpson is a small woman-owned firm. My background is 25 years in planning, working in all the Western communities, for the big, large firms to the small, large firms. But no matter who you work for and so on, it's really about the people you're dealing with and making sure that you do authentic public involvement. And that's our passion. We're lucky enough to have joining us is Mitch Hendrick. He's one of our great planners, a superstar, and he is like a lot of our, not to age myself here with my gray beard, but he is like many of our younger folks. They are already ahead of us and they are moving on. And this process is really about us not only catching up with people like Mitch, but Mitch, my goal is to surpass you one day. So in terms of everything. So I'll turn it over to you, Mitch.
Okay, just a quick intro on myself. I'm a planner for Logan Simpson, been here for several years, and prior to that, I was in law enforcement. But the things while I was there, things that I saw that were needed the most were community engagement. There was a big lack of that, and now in my position as planner throughout these communities in the West, we're seeing just incredible levels of engagement, but COVID has kind of accelerated that to the point where people are being more comfortable with this. So part of the purpose of this presentation format we're doing today is to use Mentimeter. I don't know how many of you are familiar with it, but we're going to be asking you a series of questions and basically asking you to pull your phones out or use your second or third screen, however many you may have, and go to this website, which I'll describe in just a second, to take part in a couple of questions in the spirit of digital engagement. So please refrain from closing out of that browser when you answer your first question. There's about to be 4 or 5 of them. So on that note, our first question, let me advance it, I got a couple screens up here. Our first question is, what are your favorite aspects of in-person engagement? And in order to take part in this, I would ask you to pull out your phones and go to menti.com. You'll see the address on the screen, very top, menti.com, and type in the 7-digit code 835849 and 2. So given that we've got quite a few people on this call, I think we'll give it just a little while, let all the answers start streaming in. You'll see answers pop in as we go. And I imagine with the amount of attendees we have, it'll be streaming up and down. Okay.
Awesome. Thanks you guys so much for participating. So Mitch posed the question, what are your favorite aspects of in-person engagement? Starting to see some great things pop up, personal connections, questions answered quickly, neighbors talking to neighbors, people connecting, discussion, one-on-one, meeting. Let me minimize so I can see all of the answers coming in here. Breaking down barriers, personal component, looking people in the eyes, conversing. So there's a lot about this human to human connection that's popping up here. And that's a lot of what we also anticipated seeing in this space. As we go through this presentation and as we go through this material, we built this based on asking ourselves the same questions that we're asking all of you. Seeing physical reaction to discussions. Bruce is going to talk about that one a bit later as well. That's a fantastic one. Gauging emotions, personal, again, breaking down barriers and accountability. So there's this kind of human to human thing that shows up in person, right? Two-way exchange, back and forth. It's not about just getting information, right? That's pretty easy to get without having to go somewhere. Seeing and meeting community members, fantastic. Happy hour, yeah. Informal connections, great, you guys, I like it. So we asked ourselves some of these same questions, and we're going to be going through what really is a list of about 10. But what we realized when we listed those 10 things out is that they really group into about 4 main areas. And the benefit for that for you all is that it makes for a lot fewer slides. So, you know, kudos to us for being able to make that group for you, right? This is the one that probably is the most impassionate for me. I kind of get deep in this, and so Mitch is going to need to prod me, I'm sure. This is my favorite book, Start With Why, Simon Sinek, The Golden Circle. For those of you that might not be familiar, quick overview, really shortchanging his work, is this golden circle. And so what Simon did was he went in and he said, what is it that makes fantastic organizations fantastic? And what is it that they do differently from all of the good or even really good organizations? Why is it that they stand out differently? And so he started to put it into this category. And he said it's not what they do or how they do it, it's how they talk about what they do and how they do it. And the deal is that they start with the why. He uses an example about Apple, and you know, this work was written in 2015. So you know, really going back to 2015 and thinking about how Apple really looked differently than a lot of other really great tech companies out there. And the thing that they did is they didn't talk about their new phone in their commercials. They talked about why people use technology, right? They talked about being able to connect and being able to download applications and being able to share pictures and get onto the different communication channels that they might want. Slowly, they would talk about how that became possible and what it actually was. I love taking these concepts and really moving them into the local government space, the planning space, and the community engagement space. When we do that, there's a tool I like to use called the 9 whys. It's something called a liberating structure. It's a way to get us to think differently and move beyond some of the thinking norms that we often find ourselves in, especially in a group meeting dynamic. So what you do is kind of come up with, well, why are we doing this engagement? What is this about? Why are we doing it? Whatever that answer is, I challenge you to ask yourself again, why is that important? And again, why is that important? As you do that, and oftentimes you don't need to do it 9 times, I think you usually come up with your value at about 4 whys in. And that values place really is the center of the community engagement effort. If you can go out and talk to your community about the values piece, even if there's priority value differential in the community, right? One values connectivity while one values personal space. It's okay if they compete as long as they're named and they're given a place. It helps to show the purpose of your overall effort. Once you've done that, you can really move into the how and the what, which in this case becomes your process for engagement, and then the decision or program that you're creating or trying to make. The benefit of talking about values first allows your audience or your community to use a different part of their brain. The limbic brain is what controls our emotions, it's what controls our feelings. And most biologists and psychologists agree, it's also what determines our behavior. The limbic brain is really what works in that why and how space. Our analytic brain is what comes into play, the neocortex, when we think about what. So it's really moving people to a place of deep contemplation when you start with why. So now that I've evangelized enough about our number one thing, we're going to move on to our next topics and talk to you about the other things that we came up with as the most valuable things about in-person engagement. And Bruce is actually going to take this one.
Right. If we think back how the world was 6 months ago, and I know a lot of you deal with elected officials, community members, and so on, and that was clearly when we polled you, part of it is in-person buy-in, was great. It really showed our personal connection to people. You saw people smile, you're able to react to them, you're able to look them in the eye as I saw those comments coming by. Let's not forget happy hour. I didn't forget, that was not lost on me. But happy hour, I just reframed it when I put in my message of more of a debrief. But it's a debrief and a chance to socialize and actually talk about these values. You also see, that question about an invested community. And my old boss, when I was young, she said, 90% of your life is about showing up, right? And being present. And today, when we look, do we actually show up at anything? Do we make that trip to somewhere to show we are a dedicated member of the community? And you can see who shows up, and there's some value to that. Then also this idea of really being able to sort of banter back and forth of sharing diverse ideas. And it's hard to do that via a digital medium. And sometimes a conversation is very powerful when you can do it together. And then lastly, in terms of buy-in, we always talk about the underrepresented. And as a consultant, we get asked that question every time. How are you going to reach those that do not participate? Well, my answer is usually the same, is we go to them, or we make sure it's approachable in a fashion that makes sense for them. But clearly by showing up where they are, and whoever they is, that could just be a mother or father with a couple of kids who's got a couple of jobs, especially today. By showing up at a grocery store back in the day, you were able to capture those folks. By showing up at a school football game, you really captured that diversity. And I love that about personal involvement. It's something that we need to consider as we continue on this discussion about digital involvement, of how to make that work in the digital realm. The other thing about clearly what I liked about in person, and I'm trying to play off the comments that were rolling in, were just great. But you hear a lot about the concepts of charrettes, and then as well as open houses where you get to discuss with the engineer about the solution. Small group discussions were very powerful, and just as short again as a year ago, it was about smaller listening sessions, and it was about dialogue back and forth. You always have to say, did we get what we wanted out of those small group discussions? But clearly people could ask key information and get those personal responses. But one thing that really hit me was, and I'll go on a tangent here, is I've got two 21-year-old Gen Zs, and so maybe they're the ones who are overtaking Mitch, because I think Mitch is a millennial, but they again they live in a different world, but they are now out of the house, and I live with my dog, and so when I look at my dog, we're always talking to our dog and going, come on, sweetie, or, you know, these sort of, we're always talking to our dog over and over again. And the latest book I read said that we've overstimulated our pets because we use verbal communication and we talk at them all day long. So you can just imagine how this animal feels as it gets verbally berated 24/7, maybe out of kindness and love. But the reality is most animals react through other signals, through the subtle eye contact and so on. So I looked up, well, are humans the same way? Or are we very different than you know, my dog named Coda? And I'm surprisingly found we're not. Most communication, I think it's less than 20% of our communication is done verbally. So the rest is body language and eye contact, seeing someone's reaction. And if we think about in person, you can see if someone's mad or if they turn away from you or if they're not making eye contact. And we don't have that in the digital world. So if we're having meetings such as this, are we missing more than half of the dialogue that we normally would have with a person? And that's always a tough one. And especially when we're, you know, we've got over 300 people attending this seminar right now. And I can't look into your eyes and see if you're reacting. But on a recent commission meeting, you could see, you know, if you only have 4 or 5 people, you can see if someone's got their hands crossed, and you have to look deeply to make that personal connection work in a digital world. Being there in person in an audience like you see down in the bottom there, I think that's Winter Park, Florida, where we're presenting, or I can pick out audience members and see how they're reacting as I speak. So, you know, you miss that, and it's something that we want to capture in our digital technology.
So there's another important aspect of community in-person engagement piggybacks on what Bruce had just laid out with personal connection and accessibility. It's validation, and whether that's validation of meeting someone that thinks the same way that you do about an important community issue, or having a spirited discussion about someone who feels differently, or whether it's the physical validation of pinning something on a map or putting a post-it note on somewhere, or doing something physical in person on a map where it's permanent essentially and it's recorded. Or it's the accessibility or the ability to confirm that you're just heard by local decision makers, community leaders, and friends, neighbors, and family, and knowing that when you leave that space, whether it's a library or a gymnasium, wherever, that your input will be considered and it was heard and most likely recorded in a meeting fashion. And to touch further on that, sometimes digital engagement can feel like you're in a silo. Like Bruce had just said, we have over 300 people in this chat, yet you can only all hear me. And maybe that's why nobody laughed at Bruce's joke, but maybe not. We don't know. So maybe he is funny.
I think that's the reason. So.
And on that, so I'd like everyone to pull back their phones out and let us know what your least favorite aspects of in-person engagement are, knowing that we just hit on some of the good aspects around buy-in, connection, accessibility, and validation. And I know a lot of people on this call may be more thinking in the planner mindset, but also put yourself in the shoes of a citizen.
That's great. Fantastic. Angry people. I'm sure we could all share about 100 angry people stories, right? Physical touch, beratement, the scary people, loudest voices talking over the others. Sometimes you don't want to engage. I'll throw in my own, you know, people that just showed up to see what the food was, right? And if you didn't have any food, woe be unto you. Now they're the angry people. Confrontation, getting COVID, certainly. Angry participants, conflict. You know, it's kind of interesting. When we asked what's your favorite, right? It was all those happy places that people go when they're together, right? The good community environment, the ideas bouncing off one another, that kind of organic feeling that we get when we're our best selves and we're interacting in a group. And then this is kind of the opposite, right? It's the anger, it's the confrontation, it's the dominance, it's the power. Long drives in the dark and snow. Yeah. I can't believe parking hasn't shown up yet. Maybe it's because I worked in the city of Boulder for a few years, but parking's like my #1 response here. Arguments, same people I've seen before. Yeah, you know who they are, right? Angry stuff. Yeah, we're really starting to see a lot of commonality. Time investment. That's a fantastic one. Not only the time investment of the participant, but the time investment for you as staff and the presenter and the organizer. There were times in my career where we would spend, collectively probably 1,000 hours to put together an event that lasts 3 hours long, and maybe 25 people would show up, right? It affects you as a staff member. NIMBYs taking heat about drainage when we need to talk about planning. That's one thing that's really hard to control in person, is when people talk off topic. When you're online, as long as you've written very clear rules about what you're going to allow to stay and what you're going to take down if it's off topic, you have a lot more ability to do so. Now, you always want to be sure that even if you quote unquote take down from public view, that you've saved it as part of your official record, right? But if you've made clear lines about what you're going to allow to stay publicly viewable on the site and how it has to fit into the topic, I think you have a lot more ability to control that. Overtaking the meeting with one speaker, stress, yelling. One of the other things I'll add here is, you guys as planners, some of you love to get in front of people. Some of you love to talk. I've worked with a myriad of planners over my career, and some would rather be hit with a stick than have to lead a public presentation. Just like any other profession, right? You didn't get into it necessarily for public speaking. So maybe you're great at it and you enjoy it. Maybe you despise it. So it's almost like when you're in person, you're forced maybe into these roles sometimes that you might not want to be in. But looking back at that participant standpoint, what that means is sometimes people that maybe don't want to be leading the conversation or leading it, and that can be tough. Whereas online, it's a little bit easier to assign, maybe based on our skill set. Citizens want to use the forum for another topic. Yeah, I've talked about that. Talking over, won't stop talking. It's probably how you're feeling about me right now. So we'll continue to collect your input and share it back. But Mitch, if you'd like to move us forward. Body language.
Sure thing. So thank you for that, Amanda, and thank you all for your answers so far. Now that we've kind of passed the negative side, we're going to be looking at some of the tools that aim to replicate some of those positive aspects we spoke about earlier and make them functional online. And as we said, some of those components Bruce and I had mentioned as far as validation or buy-in, one of them is the real-time response kit. And that's where it really stems from when you're talking with people, community members, neighbors, and decision makers. So tools like Mentimeter, which we're using right now, are bang the table, where you have countless ways to engage, whether you want to use just traditional questionnaires, mapping tools. You can upload your own GIS layers. It's pretty incredible. They have quick polls, SMS texting, and just overall education is easier than you'd find on a traditional community or municipality's website. To looking at something like Conveo, which is somewhat of a dream for planners who are looking to get direct public comment on their documents rather than like right where you need it, whether it's a specific line or place on the right page, rather than a randomly placed vague comment where you kind of have to guess what the comment is speaking to. And another one is Mural, which is more of a visual charrette tool or virtual charrette tool that makes design projects more accessible to the general public and creates a greater understanding of the project, and also allows for some pretty intimate comments. And these tools really allow us to identify some of the most pressing issues in the community. If you take a look at that word cloud to the right, that is from Big Sky, Montana, which we'll speak to later. The community is experiencing a pretty, as is most of the United States, a pretty rapidly increasing wealth divide, is in serious need for affordable and workforce housing. And they're also concerned about their potential to become an incorporated community, because right now they're just a resort town, and basically incorporation would greatly change their community and how organizations grow and change and distribute services. And lastly, as I'm sure we're all using various tools like GoTo right now, or Teams or Zoom, when you're doing some of these meetings, we do have the ability for chat functions, so there's call and response right away. And there are, as I'm going to point to in the next slide when I pass this off to Bruce, the face-to-face piece is now becoming more mainstream as everyone's gone online in the last couple of months.
Yeah, I mean, if you look, and I just want to say to all the audience members, I just love the flood of information that we're able to get through a seminar like this, of both frustration and optimism is just great, and kind of illustrating some of these things. But the idea that we've lost that face-to-face, and I'm coming back to what we liked about in-person meetings, is can we recapture that through the digital medium? And I mentioned where we've all in the scene you see there, and thanks Mitch for, looks like I'm in there. It looks like with a group like that where you have 8 people on a Zoom meeting, you can, as long as people turn on their cameras, which is always an issue nowadays, but you can sort of gauge that. But again, with 400 people, or meetings we've had of 600 people online, you can't. So we've lost that ability to remember for picking up how people communicate, with only a small percentage of it being just words, but it's other things. But clearly, people are getting the hang of both video and audio submissions, but especially video. And the more that that's transferred, where people can speak freely, create their own videos, upload it, then there is a personal connection. There's also clearly what we talked about is roundtables, smaller groups, and the ability to break out into these smaller groups via Zoom meetings, or to have multiple meetings is something that we've been doing, where it's a week-long charrette, but you come for this part, and then you come for this part, and that works extremely well. But also maybe taking it farther and allowing components like Bang the Table has a story feature, and we'll talk a little bit about a website we're using for Cache County, where it's linking to NPR's stories, where it becomes very, very personal. And the idea of making digital personal is something that I think we should strive to, because it does become a little bit of a barrier, a digital barrier. But if I can tell a story, it's great. And the last thing is, we all like to say how, no one handwrites anymore. I'm old enough to talk about handwriting and so on, or no one knows how to actually write anymore. And the idea that for at least half, I think for most of 2019, when people were texting me LOL, I thought it meant lots of love. So I thought I had this network of folks that were out there that I was questioning, why are they texting me this? But later found out it was laugh out loud. And it's made a big difference in my life, I'll just say. But the power of the written word, I think people are starting to think about what they write, how they write it, in a way that we're almost going back to the days of these great planning books that we've all read as planners, that really inspired us to do great things. And we're thinking about the words we write, how we write them, and it addresses even things about being respectful. The ones that we didn't like about in-person meetings was people being disrespectful, I saw the word bereavement. These are very personal things to planners. So if people think about the words that they choose and then they're recorded, I think that's a power step for planning and public involvement. All right, Amanda.
Awesome. Thanks, Bruce. You know, when we do staging and we talk about process plans and outlines and things in the in-person environment, I'm sure you guys all have, depending on where you're from in the country, horror stories about trying to carry those big, giant planning boards, right, into a meeting, and we set 100 of them up in a row. I spent my first 12 years in government in Estes Park, Colorado. Fingers crossed, Estes Park continues to stand over the next few days. A lot of fear with winds increasing. But about that wind, carrying those giant planning boards in Estes Park is one of the worst parts of my career memory when I think back, right? Like, it was always blowing, they'd always be torn. You at least had to chase one down the street and retrieve it. And that was really in the summertime when there wasn't much wind. In the winter, it was almost impossible. So you think about some of these things and how we kind of overcame the challenges in person to still give the public the ability to sort of walk through the room and see how we got to where we are in proposals, right? Especially when you get to the end of the process and you're kind of in that choice selection mode and refinement of the choices that the community's made with you. But when we do this in the online environment, we want to give people that same ability to sort of walk through the process with us. And some of our processes are really long. There's an example on the slide there from Broomfield, Colorado, friends and neighbors. The city of Broomfield's been working on decisions about a civic center for about 14 years. And they finally come to some decisions and are moving forward with the project, as I understand it. But what I want to point out about Broomfield, and I invite you to go and look at the website that's pictured there, the engagement site rather, they put together this timeline and they made these short videos about key decision points and key kind of move forward points and steps backward points. And so what that does is it allows new community members who are just coming into the fray to really get up to speed pretty quickly. When Mitch and Bruce and I were discussing this earlier, you know, we said, hey, you can kind of get up to speed in about 20 minutes. The reality is that if you get 20 minutes for a community member to get up to speed, they're pretty interested in the topic. So that's probably about the most you can expect from the majority, right? So the best you can do is really use rich media, really concise it down. For those that are intrigued about a particular point, they're going to take that deeper dive. They're going to watch the more archived videos. They're going to read your city council minutes. They're going to look at different project planning committee meetings and decisions. They're going to do that for themselves, but it's never going to be the masses. So really just inviting, as you move into the digital first space, think about how staging looks differently. The use of different colors in the zoning process example there on the slide as well, it makes it really easy for my eye to kind of key in. You can think about links there that would be a deeper dive for individuals, but I can pretty quickly skim that and sort of see how that particular city made its path along the snake, if you will, right, to get to zoning adoption. So what does that mean? It means that when you have a new development project happening and someone says, what are you talking about? When did we change the zoning for that area? It's really easy to walk them back through the snake. This is how we got to this point. Awesome. So the next thing that I want to address is really a variety of tools. Just like in person, you would have all those different presentation materials, those different boards put up on the stands that, I don't know about you, I've never found a brand that works fantastically, but the stands hold the charts. We've got charts showing different things. We've got images, we've got some text. We have different experts in the room talking about different aspects of the project, right? Just like you have all those different voices, those different levels of expertise, those different specializations, including the community connection relationship people, which are usually different from the expert voices. You also would use different presentation modules, right? You might show a video, you might have a conversation, you might ask questions, you might have different exercises for the community to do. You have to still think about all those different things in the online environment. Almost without fail, the ones that work in person are probably different than the ones that work online. This whole term of synchronous, asynchronous, I don't know about you guys with kids out there, but boy, has that been a big topic for schools during COVID, right? We have synchronous days, we have asynchronous days, we have synchronous classes, asynchronous classes. You know, what that really means is I've got a facilitator or a teacher or a leader either walking me through or I'm on my own. Think about that when you're designing your digital approach. Think about the deep dive. We talked about that in the surface. Think about multiple choice and essay when you do a questionnaire. Think about taking your surveys and breaking them down into really simple questions that go along a timeline. Think about it almost as though you're flipping the survey from vertical to horizontal. And again, people got that on-ramp and off-ramp to participate as they see fit. We'll look at some of the Logan Simpson sites and how they're using maps to gain input. Many people, I'm not one of them, but I know most of you probably are, think in that visual spatial way. And when we ask them to read a bunch of text, we lose their valuable input because they're not their best selves, right? And for you guys who probably as a group lean toward that map loving part of the continuum, remember those of us that do think more in that text space, right? So it's the mix, the left brain and the right brain. The biggest thing that you do here is you think about all of your key groups, your target populations, and you ask yourself, did I develop some part of this process, some part of this page, some part of this project specifically thinking about that group? And have I made it easy for them to participate with me? And if the answer to that question is yes, I think you're well on your way. It doesn't stop there for organizational responsibility, however. We had this great conversation over the last few days, Bruce and Mitch and myself, and we're talking about what is this big thing? We're trying to make this point of how do you bring the best of face-to-face into digital and then back, right? Someday we're going to talk about that next. How do you take the digital to in-person as we start to open back up and integrate more? And part of it is we can have the very best tools. We can have a litany of tools. We can have a litany of processes. But the organizational responsibility is all about how we integrate those with our processes. It really takes a lot more scenario planning about community engagement with the use of these digital tools than it did before. We don't get the benefit of asking the question and then drawing the curtain while we crunch data. When we use live data tools, the community and us find out the results at the same time. It can be overwhelming. So internally, we have to have had the conversation, if this, then what? What is the next step based on what we hear from the community? So really encourage you to start having those conversations internally so that you're prepared. And Bruce is going to take us into the next session, our next section of our session.
Yeah, happy to. I mean, it's great that we went back and forth, and I think this is the discussion we just had. And I don't have to say much, but, well, maybe I'll say a few things. One is clearly the picture on the left is from California, so we can make fun of that. But sorry for anyone from California. But on that one, the term that they use for that slide is, and I'm not sure APA regulations on what words I can use, but it's I'll just spell it out. And that's something my dog will not understand, which is a good thing, but BITCH and fix. So it's the, bitch and fix type of concept. But, even today, when we're were out there and we just talked about the pros and cons, we definitely have elected officials who still believe that the only way to get public involvement is in person and hearing from a few people. And if you think about a staff report and you put in 200 letters, and letters is almost a digital medium, right? I mean, it might be printed on paper, but it was delivered from there. Do those 200 comments that were made, or the comments you made on a website, are the three people here, well, two people here speaking, maybe speaking, are their comments worth more than our electeds reading through the comments that were submitted, where that written word was very intentional? Or an event like this, where your comments were made with thoughtfulness? And here, you know, the question is there a better way where we can avoid this and then do something different? On the other side, though, you saw all the things about what we don't like about Zoom meetings. And the idea, you know, we all have it, where you're having a great digital meeting, people turn off their camera, and then, for example, someone might come back and they're sweating. And so I'm like, did you just go and work out during our meeting? And so that lack of attentiveness that can happen, or disconnection between the personal on an in-person, on a digital meeting, is clearly there. We know that we get better results on digital, but we know that we need the in-person because you know, we're people and we're social animals. But it's sometimes convincing ourselves to change. And again, you know, if we think about my Gen Zs to Mitch to our electeds, how we are at different places with technology, this evolution is not something where we're going to go back to just in person, because we're going to realize clearly all the benefits of digital and also all the drawbacks that we're going to work on fixing. I hate to parallel it to a roundabout, but it's almost similar in the discussion about roundabouts 10 years ago, and it still exists today. Is, you know, roundabouts, you know, what is it, a 10 to 20 times performance ratio on traffic flow on a roundabout. It's also 99% safer in terms of fatal accidents. Yet, if you go out there and say, we're ready for change and we want to place that roundabout, we still don't always implement it because of that resistance. It is an evolution, but we are moving faster and faster towards that goal. And this conversation, this great conversation we're having today, is just an example of that. And I apologize for the California. My sister lives there, so. Okay. I know.
And just before we dig into the case studies that Amanda mentioned a few slides earlier, we want to ask you guys another question. How do we improve engagement? How can it become better, safer, and more fruitful? And you can think of this in the lens of what you've done, what you want to do, or what you've seen done elsewhere.
And this is a harder question. This is, you know, we've heard both sides. It's how do we sort of take the next steps with both digital and in person, so that, especially digital, so that it works for everyone and has the benefits of in person, and then also the benefits of digital.
I think all three of us can speak to what you guys are suggesting that really kind of resonates. And I love that the first comment was equity. You know, how can we use digital tools to increase the equity and participation, right? How do we perhaps do things differently for very targeted populations who might not otherwise come to our kind of standard our site or question or opportunity? I love seeing that. Webcams, I love it. You know, you get to address a lot of those issues that we saw come out with the last question from you guys about this lack of ability to read outside of the words. And you know, and I know we all have social media in the echo chamber on our minds, and you know, how do we move beyond that, right, and deal with the whole person? How do we address things differently at the local level so that we get that whole person approach? Combination of styles, inclusion, personal conversations, follow-up, and one-on-one. I love that. I think sometimes we believe that if we do digital engagement, it takes out the need for that. Actually, I think that's really a fallacy. I think it probably increases it, right? The follow-up from the digital is just as important as a follow-up from an in-person event. Clear information, conflict resolution. I'm such a believer in the fact that community engagement is all about conflict resolution, right? You know, having those experts on your staff be involved and do some mediation, and albeit perhaps informal in most cases, on the side to help groups understand one another and work through what could be very polarized opinions or positions. Meet people where they are. Absolutely love the small breakout and digital sessions. Partner with schools and other institutions.
I saw someone chimed in with TikTok. I'm not really familiar with TikTok, but I do know that I'm assuming Bruce was mentioning earlier he didn't know what LOL meant, but I'm sure his daughters know what TikTok is. And there are ways, even through Instagram. I know Facebook's trending towards the older demographic now, Instagram and now TikTok. There are probably ways to creatively get the message out in even small communities.
Mitch, you should know, hence my daughters, I am on TikTok. So that will be a challenge for our attendees if they can find me out there. So, and,
well,
and,
you
and
said you want to do a clip me someday, and you have. You've done it.
Any of your planning departments who are producing TikTok videos, I beg you to send those directly to me. I would love to showcase them. One of the things that I'll add to our follow-up email from this, there's a city who's put together a sewer safety video, and it's, you know, it's just all about humor, but really a fantastic way to get the message across. And things like TikTok would be the same, I would think, is just this opportunity to make it fun, like somebody just posted. Absolutely. Social responsibility on how we talk, a better civil conversation. You guys, we're going to be in civil cleanup for the next year, right? How do we make this a more civil society? How do we use local government as the leadership to create civil conversations? I love it. One thing is we have to educate people about how to be a part of local government, right? How do we re-educate people about what it means to take civic responsibility?
I wanted to chime in to see if
go ahead, Mitch.
Folks could just say there are platforms that we didn't mention earlier in this presentation, whether it was Bang the Table, Menti, Conveo, or Mural. If there's any that we didn't mention that maybe you've been using lately, I would recommend or suggest that you throw those in the ways, because we're going to be downloading and saving all of these too.
Fantastic. The integration and mixture of online and person is going to be so different and so valuable. It's kind of like when you get your kids in a room, or at least at my age, when I get my kids in a room, and quite frankly, even when I'm in a room with my own peers in my 40s, everybody's kind of sitting in the room together, but you're all on your phone. What does it look like when we go back in person and we're still using digital tools because we've learned about the results and the quality of those results? Where's that balance? Thank you guys so much for this level of participation.
Okay, Amanda, I'm looking at the clock, and I think if we want to make sure we get in the kind of a tour of the websites, I think might be a good time to move on.
Absolutely. You guys keep your comments coming in. We'll send them out to you.
So
Bruce, do you want to give the group a quick overview on the three, just the case studies in general that we're going to be speaking to?
Yeah, no, happy to. And talk a little bit about, you know, where it sounds easy, but just like in-person public involvement, digital public involvement, or hybrid involves intent, and it also involves the why. So you've got to do it correctly or irrespective, and you've got to monitor your success and adjust where necessary. The examples that we're going to give, most of them are hybrids, and we can talk about what a hybrid is. Where is, are we shifting more to one to the other? But it's never at the exclusion of in-person, and never at the exclusion of digital. So I'll talk a little bit about Cache County, and that's where Logan is located in Utah. It is, an awesome place. It's behind a valley, so on up. There we go. And what's interesting about it is it's got so many small, beautiful towns. Almost half of it is just natural public lands. But to reach everyone there is a little bit difficult. So some of the smaller towns do want us to be present. And in the case of Imagine Cache, in this case, it's a comprehensive plan, a fiscal analysis of rural, and it's also creating a structure for partnerships, funding, and also regulations between all these towns and cities and the county. So no pressure there for public involvement, right? But we are using a combination of in-person and digital, with an emphasis on digital. Now, in person, it is a tough one, because I'll just say in a positive way, the planners there are brilliant and they are thoughtful. But it is a place where they did insist on having the county fair, and the planners are like, well, so do I really want to be out there during the county fair, and do people want to talk to you? So there's an art to doing this. So one of the ways that we're doing is we're focusing on, a beautiful, engaging website, that's clear. But any in-person event that we do, it is graphic and visual. So right now there's in-person events going on, and our graphics are big. It's one way in, one way out. But the idea there on the in-person goal is to be present. We care enough to make sure that we're invested to be there for you. Now look at these graphics and so on, but people don't necessarily want to touch things during COVID, even if they attend an in-person meeting. So they want to know that you care, that maybe they can ask you a few questions, but they can move towards a digital response, even if they like being there in person. And Mitch, just, do you want to just jump over to the text component for the interest of time? We won't go through it all, but this is a new technology with Bang the Table, real-time texting, where you're not going through a third party, but it's going right to this area. We can screen it, and then it's cool that it's also got a filter. If you go by just, can you sort by days and view all ideas?
Yes.
These are people, doing things on the fly. We can talk about that whole risk, but the idea that you're just getting in comments consistently, because we're present out there, we're pumping it out through social media, is being very effective. So I'm looking 2 hours ago and so on. And that is the seamless connection of technology, the next evolution, where you're on your phone, you're on a webinar, you're responding, and it's assembling the information real time. Now people can ask the question, well, what about profanity? Or what about, I like that comment here, I'm Daniel. There are comments like that, but there are a lot of great information that are just sort of rolling in. So that's Cache County, and it's just one method, but it's a combination focused on digital first, and being present in person second. And Amanda, you want to tell us a little about Hurricane?
Absolutely.
We should make everyone try to say the name and see if they say it right.
We should. Bruce and Mitch have had a little bit of fun with my Alabama accent trying to say hurricane. But this is an incredible digital engagement site. One of my favorites. Had the opportunity to do a bit of a case study and write up some of my observation about this. There's a few things that really stand out to me. This idea of becoming an expert on the site is really incredible from a, back to my kind of evangelism about starting with why. This really gives the community member an opportunity, again, on ramp, off ramp, right, to understand why a general plan is important. I know that to many of you comprehensive planners on this webinar, you have a hard time fathoming why everybody doesn't know this already. But the reality is that there's a lot of people in the community that need you to explain this information to them. And then if you can go into the next phase of the why and talk about why a particular update is important and what it is that's being covered in that update that matters to that community member, wow, we've really engaged my limbic brain, right? We've now gone to a place that helps me understand why my participation is going to be valuable, and then how I might be able to shape the future of my community, which is likely something I care a great deal about. I think the layout of this project page is very nice. You have over on the right-hand side, important documents. That's for those deep dive folks, right? You also have who's listening. You have the contact information of the individuals that are actually creating this plan, right? So if you look at something in the documents or you read something on the site and you need a person to talk to, you don't have to go any farther than this page. For some of you, your organizations adopted that practice a long time ago. For others, as well as I do, it's like finding a needle in a haystack to get an actual contact number or email. So this is a fantastic approach to answering people's why. The other thing I highly value about this site, and you guys are thinking, boy, she's like a record player that just kind of keeps playing the same song. On Have Your Say here, you're going to see a variety of tools. So remember, we had that whole list of different aspects we should be thinking about when we build the digital application of how do people get information. This is a great set of slides I can go through. I can read as much of that or as little of that as I want. If I'm looking for a few key topics, that's easy to find, and I can fast forward the pages. Once I get the information that I think I need to get up to speed, I can take the questionnaire, I can answer the map, or I can go to the idea wall. So there's all these different methods, not only for me to get information, but also for me to give it. There's that map versus no map, right? I could answer the questionnaire, or I could drop my pin on the map and tell you what I think from that visual spatial mechanism. And remember that when people are working on this particular kind of map tool, not only are they giving you spatial information, but they're receiving information. From having spent years with Bang the Table and looking at their data and how people actually use these types of tools, what I can tell you is that people are just as likely to click on at least 3 to 7 other dots or other marks on the map that other community members have written. So I challenge when we go back in person to create systems where I'm listening to at least 3 to 7 other people, right? We do that a lot of times at a small group, but that's pretty impactful. So think about, how do we do that? How do we make sure you're not only giving us information through all these different tools, but we're also receiving it through all these different tools? The last point that I want to make here is what we've heard. And again, that on-ramp, off-ramp, right? Maybe I didn't get involved in Hurricane initially. Maybe I just moved there. Maybe I've relocated because of COVID. I'm able to go here and see how we got to the place that we are. I can, read through this visioning document that was created after the first round of processes. I can see where we are in this timeline, and I can anticipate how I'm going to be involved in the future. this is really key. It's really an iteration, right? It's ask the questions, tell the community what you heard, ask the next round of questions, right? It's really that phased public process that we've been talking about. You cannot skip this step. Skipping this step and going all the way to the full process summary will leave a lot of people wondering where they didn't track appropriately, especially right now with so much media about so many other things. Can't emphasize enough how very valuable and well designed this page is. So give it a look, and hopefully it'll provide a resource for you.
Okay, and our third case study is Big Sky, Montana, where we worked with the community of Big Sky, which is not incorporated, as I mentioned earlier. It's actually a resort tax district. So the entire structure of the community and the services are different than your traditional municipality. Essentially, they take in a resort tax from visitors, businesses, and so on. And at the time when we were working with them, they were allocating millions of dollars on an annual basis rather than providing these NGOs and other organizations that are providing key services some predictability. So these organizations were asking for money, but really wouldn't know what's coming in the next year. So in Big Sky, we really hit it home with Bang the Table. We had a website which is no longer available because the project has ended. But what we did, as Bruce mentioned, for Cache County is we're using in-person events to funnel people to the website. And Sky, population community, but quite hard to get around. I mean, if you're in the center of town, if you want to go to the ski hill, it's not a short, easy trip unless you have a car. So we used a variety of events and going to softball games, different breweries, farmers markets, various roundtables and discussions at the ski hill to bring people to this website. We were able to get a couple thousand comments and distill them over the course of a year, a little over a year, into that 10-year strategic plan with funding allocations based upon those tax revenue projections and the community identified priorities. So you can see on the screen here, you've got the word cloud on the left. It was one of the first phases to kind of get some of those general ideas. And to the right, in the document itself, was a breakdown of their allocated funding based on their projections into specific priorities based on those colors and those sections of the document. So that was, I would have to say that this is probably my favorite project because of the great in-person engagement we got and what we got online out of that. And Bruce, I'd like to pass this along to you if you have any closing words about Big Sky.
I think for planners, you know, if you go back to the in-person and the digital, we all want to make a difference, and we want a process that's pure and really represents our community. Because this was a resort district, they turn a blind eye to the 2 counties that they're in, because they are the second, they're self-generating and funding. So they are the second largest revenue city or district in Montana. So it goes Bozeman, then Big Sky. And so they cover every part of their expenses, needs, fire, healthcare, social services. And this was a purist approach because they don't have government, and this is interesting. They have a district and boards, and those boards fund everything. And so we're doing their CIP, essentially. We were simply able to ask people, look, you need to sign in, you need to put your name, you need to own it. But if you do this, almost like, it's not quite voting, but it's voting with your values and explanation. Doing that for the whole community, you get a real sense of where people actually want things to happen. And the results are very different than what you see at a podium. And the results in this case was not resort housing up on the hill, not ski hills, not second homes. It was affordable housing. And that's where, millions of dollars in this case is being allocated over the next 20 years. It was surprisingly improving the wastewater treatment plant. Can you believe this? Where people are going, yes, I want to improve the wastewater treatment plant. The reason is through these tools, they were able to understand that their water systems and their rivers, especially the Gallatin River, they wanted it to have not only good water quality, but to have even a better water quality than any other place for years to come. And then also the next priority is the ecosystem, the place where grizzly bear reintroduction happened is right here, and acknowledging that along with our affordable housing and allocating money by values. It's a very difficult thing, but if done right, this in-person connection of explaining mixed with the digital component can give you that ultimate answer that we're looking for, which is the true will of our people.
And with that, I'm going to lead us into one more question for you all on the call today before we go into a general Q&A after this. So this is the final question, and it'll show up in more of a word cloud fashion. So if you could think of, in 3 words or less, what does engagement look like in the post-COVID environment?
How fun is it to watch the word cloud be created like this?
As long as we're spelling the words right, it'll keep going. That's what we've noticed in some other communities. If you type a word wrong, it might fall down, but if it's said enough, it'll generally rise to the top.
You know, just so we're clear, spelling was one of the hardest things in person too, right? How many people on this webinar were the one that had to take the 6,000 sticky notes and try and figure out what they said? As one, that was really hard. Remember when people had to handwrite their email address and you were supposed to be able to then email them from that? So challenging. So, you know, it's an evolution, right? That there wasn't anything perfect before, and there's certainly nothing perfect now. It's just a continual evolution of how we keep getting better, better, and better.
I think conspiracy is an interesting one that seems to be, it is now taking the lead.
Mitch, you go ahead and interpret that one.
I won't. There's an election in a couple days. I'm going to leave that one.
Gonna just let that sit
as
there.
It is. But as far as otherwise, there seems to be a lot of what we were talking about earlier. Open air is a good one.
Yeah.
I know even once, you know, the vaccine is hopefully readily available, I think people might be more comfortable in that open air situation. A little bit more room to move around, a little bit spacing might come into play more.
For sure. What an awesome way for local governments to use some of their best spaces too, right?
Absolutely. Eco-friendly, faster, robust, 24 hours.
I wonder if being outside in a beautiful space also helps with some of those angry components we were seeing as what we want to leave behind, right?
Yes, unless you're in Big Sky in the winter in 2 feet of snow. Then you might want to find a
in Big Sky, you're going to need to work in the summer.
That's what we did primarily. We got a little bit of winter work, but it was great in the summer. People, and another benefit of that was, you know, you get some of the second homeowner crowd in while it's seasonal, and then when the off season, you get some of the people who live there year round. So it was a good way to get everybody online.
Free food. I love that. I completely agree with it. Serving food looks different moving forward, right?
Yes.
It's no longer a big bowl of pretzels.
We're doing pretty good on these responses, but given that we have 12 minutes, do we want to start closing out?
You bet.
Okay, well, please keep submitting your answers. And again, we will record and download these.
Equity.
Conspiracy and free food. Okay, hold on.
If I'm not mistaken, we're going to move into some question and answer.
That's right. And we do have quite a few questions. I've been trying to consolidate them here since we have about 10 minutes. So if everyone wants to throw their webcams back on so that we can see your faces, we can have a quick discussion here. Hello. All right, let's get started. Yeah. Okay. This is a good question. Do you have any advice about monitoring chats at the same time as presenting? This type of multitasking can be hard, and I agree with that statement. So what can we do with that? Do we just need to find an assistant to kind of help curate the questions, or are there any tips or tricks that you all have for kind of being a one-person band?
Bruce, do you want to hit on the Farmington example, perhaps? Oh, no, yeah, I'm happy to hit on multiple examples here. We work a lot for the federal agencies, and their requirements are I don't think they've gone to the level of making it approachable or necessarily fun, but they definitely have gone to the level of making it defensible, accurate, and making sure that people's thoughts are accounted for, and hence, you know, the federal government and NEPA and so on. On those ones, there's a misconception that in-person meetings are cheaper. I mean, are more expensive, sorry. That you fly people in, you know, you got to produce all this stuff, and they're necessarily more expensive. If you are dealing with a meeting that's dealing with several thousand people, and you really want to acknowledge them, the cost is equal. And again, the balancing of these two, the idea that you have one person monitoring who comes in and who comes out, another person monitoring who gets promoted to speak and who doesn't, another one monitoring the comments, and sometimes that's two people filtering comments, and there's even levels where we're promoting and we're passing comments through. So even grouping of questions and the promoting of questions, and even the promoting of people who respond. And again, these are meetings that we do when there's several thousand people. But again, having a dedicated person. So a lot of firms like ourselves and a lot of cities have gone to where there is a person who's in charge of sort of the dynamics of a meeting, and there's multiple people with different roles. So we think about life after life as we go forward. And I don't say life after COVID anymore. I learned not to say that 3 months ago. But it's more of these new jobs that are going to be created that are really about that. And I think the role of especially those monitoring chats is a very important one, because it's a respect for people's comments that they normally would have done in person.
And if I could interject there, I think I want to disagree a little bit. I find that there are these, what my husband calls keyboard warriors. And even with the webcast series, when we get our comments, you know, post survey comments, there are some real humdingers in there that I just have to let slide. And right. I sometimes think that folks hide behind keyboards and can sometimes get a little aggressive when they probably wouldn't in person. and whether or not that really expresses how they feel or if they're just getting frustration out. So I guess to that, you know, how do you sort of take all of the comments, whether they're good or not, and kind of filter out some of the emotion, I guess? If you could speak to that a little bit.
Oh, that was the whole idea about screening, and we both do it via phone, and we've had town halls where it's people phoning in, and it's almost like a talk radio show. It's the same thing with digital, where you're testing the demeanor of the speaker, and the idea is that when people speak, it should be an interaction. It shouldn't be someone back to yelling at you and yelling you virtually through words, and so on. So the quality of comments are very, very important in digital. So the word screening, back to the word conspiracy, one of the negatives is getting over the perception that you're picking and choosing, and it's really about making sure you're providing a quality experience, one where people's voices are heard and they count. And by screening some of those, for example, people who type very fast without errors, which is not myself, are incredible. They are the keyboard warriors, and they've learned how to do that. It's a new skill. So you've got to make sure that you listen to everyone and you call upon all.
You know, I'll just speak up here a bit. I really got my feet wet learning to facilitate processes and get public opinion through restorative justice practice and facilitating community group conferences. And I used to use this term that I was a recycling truck, right? So when you're in a group of 12 people and someone just insulted someone's child in a terrible way out loud, that's the hardest thing you can ever recycle to keep that group going. So it really makes a digital comment so easy to work with, right? As opposed to when someone says something in a small group and it's so impactful to a family member or a person. And really what it's about is trying to get beyond the emotion and get to the place of fear that it's coming from and address that place of fear. And I think that we never want to screen. I do think it's important in the digital space that we create guidelines that says we will hold this comment, but we will no longer allow it to have physical space in our conversation. And here's the guidelines we created prior to explain that to you. But what we have to do is follow up, right? Because as long as that anger and that fear exists in our community, we have to believe that it doesn't just belong to one person. And so we have to really dig deep and go back with some additional education, go back with some additional information, and try and turn those fears maybe into some good, solid suggestions, because they usually hover just underneath the emotion, right? So sometimes that's time intensive. I think that's the hardest part. The digital space invites so much more participation that you have to allow for the follow-up for it to be effective.
Just to piggyback on that really quick, I know at least on Facebook and some of these other mediums, the echo chamber effect hasn't produced positive results. And these websites, whether it's the ideas wall or it's the mapping, when people could see these live answers, there's not going to be as much of an echo chamber. You'd think there'd be a little bit more diversity in these answers. And as Amanda mentioned, on those educational pages, you can reach out to those folks with specific tools, specific documents and data to hopefully at least provide them an education to make them at least think about their opinion and whether they stick with it or not, but at least they will be informed moving forward.
Okay.
I think we have time for one more question. Let's talk about equity and inclusion. So what recommendations do you have for virtual public engagement in low income or aging communities that may not have either reliable access or that ability to even just call in or use the internet or anything like that? How do we reach them?
Yeah, I can start off here. We need to first recognize a little bit of bias that exists in America today. and reminded on our plan for Colorado Springs, where everything was digital and we're monitoring folks. And the lower, there's, you know, as people know, Colorado Springs, there's folks that live sort of up on one side, and then there's others. And those in the lower income areas don't always respond because they think their voice is not going to be heard. And we were using a lot of technology to do that, to outreach. And the immediate reaction was, wait a minute, this area is, because of its low income status, is not responding because they don't have technology. Again, personal biases that have come historically from us. The reality is that over 95% of folks have access to a computer or a cell phone, which is a huge percentage. And of this demographic, which is made clear by a representative from that area to the committee, was, wait a minute, we use this more than we use anything else to communicate. And that is a bias they're putting on us, and an incorrect one. The reality is the reason people didn't participate in that area is they wanted to ensure that their voices was being heard. They needed the person to come, and back to these examples we gave, to say, we're here, we're listening. That was it. And then their digital component, because everything was tracked digitally, went off the charts. And all it took was being present combined with digital technology to make that work. In the case of seniors, that is a real digital divide. Because of technology and the fact that we tend to complicate our technology, we need to either offset by making technology easier, the one button touch for folks, and everyone has your seniors, and your grandparents and so on, where they're calling you on the Zoom, and I hate to do the old joke, but like, can you see me? That is, and I can hear you laughing because you're all muted, but I hope you are. But I mean, the reality is that is a real divide, and we either offset via having a paper option in that case, and remember, we're talking about a small percentage, or we make it easier. And it's something that when we talk about what's life after COVID, that wasn't one of the top ones, and it really should be, because these are some of our most important people.
Okay, I think we'll wrap up. I was starting to get some housekeeping item real quick. I was starting to get some comments about folks trying to log their CM credits for this session, and they were having trouble finding it. And I contacted APA National during our webcast here and found out that there is a glitch going on with the CM search function. So the best way to log your credits at this point is to actually search Colorado, APA Colorado, and they will pop up, and from there you'll see a list of all of their sessions, and this being one of them. So searching by the title or event number is not going to help you today. So search APA Colorado, and then you'll be able to find today's session. So with that, thanks you guys. This was fun. This was interactive. It was nice and refreshing. So thank you for joining us, and thank you to APA Colorado for sponsoring today's session. We will have a copy of this webcast available on our YouTube channel. Again, just head over to YouTube and search Planning Webcast, and it will pop up. So everyone, thanks for joining us again. Have a great weekend, and we will talk next time.
Thank you.
Thank you all.